I was in Columbus, and that was one hell of a football game. If you wanted a great game and a top 10 matchup, you got it. Now, was it all fireworks? No, but boy, that was a rugged Big Ten top 10 battle. And Ohio State, they got the better end of it. This is how it sounded.
3rd down and 11 at the 19. McCord over the middle. Harrison Jr. again down the sideline. Maserati Mar. Touchdown. Buckeyes. Speed. Agility. Power. Balance. Maserati.
I tell you, Marvin Harrison Jr. was unbelievable for Ohio State. And he was the difference in the game. So you guys know I was a baseball player. So let's talk a little bit of baseball. And why did yesterday remind me of baseball? Well, Marvin Harrison is an out pitch. Okay. And Ohio State was not going to get beat with anything other than their out pitch. It was going to be thrown, and it was going to be thrown often. You see, when I think of baseball, I think of great pitchers, big moments. We're in that season right now with a great ALCS. We're in that World Series, time frame, and you start thinking about some of the great dominant pitchers, at least of our lifetime. And I think of a couple closers, guys that have been great starters. And generally speaking, great pitchers are great because they have somewhere to go in pressure moments. And where do they go? They go to their best pitch. And their best pitch is an out pitch. It's a pitch that they can rely on because of its greatness. All right. It's that pitch that makes them who they are. So think of some of these examples. You've got guys like Mariano Rivera. Obviously for the Yankees. What did he go to all the time? The cutter. It was maybe the most feared pitch in all of baseball for a long time. The cutter was coming. You knew it was coming, and he still threw it, and he still, for the most part, got you out. But the better part is that even if you got the better of Mariano Rivera, at least he would have the confidence or the peace of mind in knowing that you beat his best. He didn't get beat with something that wasn't his best. Think of Trevor Hoffman, great closer for the Padres. Changeup, devastating changeup. When push comes to shove and the chips are in the middle of the table, what'd you get? You got Trevor Hoffman's changeup. Randy Johnson, same thing. He was a devastating left-handed pitcher. You could not hit Randy Johnson. Why? His slider. If you were a left-handed hitter, you were going to get his slider. And you knew it, he knew it, everybody knew it, and he still threw it, and it was reliable because it was a great pitch. Well, guess what? Ohio State has one of those pitches, and that pitch just happens to be Marvin Harrison Jr. He's the best player on the field, and you have to give them a lot of credit because they, like those great pitchers, knew that they were not going to go down without giving their best, their out pitch. Penn State was going to see and feel and have to deal with Marvin Harrison Jr. time after time after time. All right. And they knew it before the game. Trust me. I mean, you really think that those coaches trust and like if you're a Penn State fan and you're listening to this, they knew what the game plan for Ohio State was going to be. I sat with them on Friday. James Franklin was crystal clear. We have to know where 18 is at all times. And it's not just enough knowing where he is. We have to have a plan for where he's at. And they did for the most part. But then this is where it gets into the next step. And the next step is the coaching staff. This is where Ryan Day and Brian Hartline, the wide receiver / quarterback, offensive coordinator, need to get a lot of credit. And the credit comes in they, you can tell, spent all week trying to figure out ways to creatively get Marvin Harrison Jr. the ball. That's all they did. And he was lined up all over. I gave a Roy Kent reference for God's sakes in the game because he was everywhere. He lined up everywhere. He was in bunch sets. He was in tight sets. He was lined up as a single wide receiver. He was out wide. He was in tight. He was off the ball. He was on the ball. He was everywhere. And they would get him the ball on easy throws, design screens, design slips in the flat, one-on-one on a slant, one-on-one on the in-breaking route, on the wheel route, bring him across on a shallow cross on that 3rd and 11. It was just a really well-designed game plan from the Ohio State perspective because they knew they were going to be undermanned. They didn't have Travion Henderson, their best running back, available. They didn't have Emeka Egbuka, their number 2 wide receiver, available. Kyle McCord wasn't playing particularly well. And guess what? It didn't matter because you were going to get Marvin Harrison Jr., their out pitch. They weren't going down unless they were going down with their best. He was targeted 16 times in that game. He was unbelievable. And it's not even a failure of the Penn State defense because the Penn State defense showed itself to be one of the best defenses in the country. It was just that, like, when push came to shove, he could elevate higher than the other guys on the field. Even the scoop and score that was called back for a hold. Why? Because it's Marvin Harrison. They're trying to throw it to Marvin Harrison Jr., and Kalen King had to hold him. That was the only way he was not going to be open on a little, basically inside. I call it a looky route. It's an inside slant across the face of that near defender. He's going to get to the inside shoulder, and King is out of position, so he has to reach out and grab. It was a good call. It's not a bad call. Happens before the ball is knocked out of McCord's hands, but that changes the game completely. Do I think that any other player has to get held right there? Probably not. So Marvin Harrison Jr. even had a hand in what was, at least for a long time in that game, the most impactful snap of the game. The other side of this is that Penn State either did not have an out pitch or we didn't see it. And that's what's, I think, frustrating for Penn State fans. You thought that, and a lot of us did, by the way, that this was going to be Penn State's moment. There was some vulnerability for Ohio State. At least some of us thought that. They're breaking in a new quarterback. They had injuries on the offensive side, Henderson and Egbuka. Their offensive line wasn't quite what it was a year ago. And it's like, okay, maybe you can get this team. Penn State looks to be even better than they were a year ago. They're getting more mature. They've got their quarterback that they feel like can take them to the next level. And we didn't see it. There was nothing there that shows me that Penn State knew how to take the next step. Because again, they didn't either have an out pitch or we didn't see it. And that's going to be frustrating for them. It's going to be frustrating for their fan base. By the way, I'm as you know, I'm sure a lot of you out there struggling a little bit with like your voice, a little cold. So if you see me drinking or hear me drinking some tea, that's what I'm doing. By the way, it's cinnamon tea. It's delicious. I think my wife, Sarah, hooked me up with some cinnamon tea. It's delicious. Okay, so let's talk about this Penn State offense. And a lot of people frustrated with the way that the offense looked. Now, listen, there are two ways to look at this. One is that Ohio State's defense played really well. True. And that's something that I'll get into in a moment. And the other is the frustration with what seemed to be a lack of aggressiveness and creativity offensively. And that's also true. Okay. So I feel that frustration. I sense that frustration, and I saw that also happen on the field. When I look at Penn State, they don't have the wide receivers that I think that they need to at this point. But that's not exactly where it has to come. Everyone's like, well, they don't have a wide receiver like Marvin Harrison. But remember, it's not just having a wide receiver like Marvin Harrison. It's having an out pitch like Marvin Harrison. Your out pitch can be a lot of things. It can be a run game. It can be a running back. It can be a tight end. Look at Georgia for that example. Brock Bowers is their out pitch, and that's why they're in some peril now because he's out with his injury. You have to have a player or an element on your team that can take you to the next level. What is your out pitch? And Penn State didn't show it. They didn't show it, or they don't have it. And I refuse to believe that they don't have it because they've got some really talented players on that side of the ball. Think about it. While they might not have the wide receivers, I know they've got really good tight ends, and they're tight ends where I feel like underutilized in the game. Their backs, I think, are the best players on their offense. Katron Allen, Nicholas Singleton. Not only were they recruited really highly, rightfully so, but they produced as true freshmen. Like, these guys are your best players. And those guys didn't get utilized as an out pitch. So this is where I'm focusing on. And the reason is because these guys, Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton, have to be put into situations like Marvin Harrison Jr. was to impact the game to the greatest degree possible. When you're talking about top 10 games, and by the way, I'm not talking about every week. Okay, let me backtrack just a moment. This is not for every week. Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't need to go to where he did on Saturday every single week in order for Ohio State to win. But when you're facing another great team, your great players have to play great football. And then you have to put them in positions to impact the game as a coaching staff. Penn State, I'm watching this game and I'm like, they thought that they could just roll in here, play their base offense and beat Ohio State on the road. That wasn't going to happen. You've got to have an element that can go above and beyond. If it's Singleton and Allen, let them do that. Put them in position to do that. Where was the element of the screen passes in space, the creativity of having them both on the field at the same time to impact the game? Heck, bring Prabula in, the backup quarterback, who's got a threat with his legs, in order to have some run game where they've got to account for the extra hat. Maybe you're equating numbers for the backs in that way. Another thing I didn't see is their spread. When they got in trouble against Northwestern, they spread their wide receivers way outside of the numbers, almost like a Tennessee-style offense or an Old Baylor-style offense. And what that did is that it allowed for far greater amount of space in the interior of the field for the backs to start to work. That's how they started getting themselves going against Northwestern. They can do that because their quarterback, Drew Aller, has a strong enough arm to still threaten you outside of each set of numbers. Didn't see any of that. So again, it's like, where was the out pitch? We never saw it. Nothing came to fruition offensively. Now, did the Ohio State defense play well? Yes. But Penn State never offered their best. At least it didn't seem like it. Just from a numbers perspective, think about this. Before the last drive, and I think Drew Aller threw like 12 passes on the last drive. So he ends up with 42 passing attempts. But if you pair that back, that was basically garbage time right at the end of that last series. Up to that point, he had thrown the ball 30 times in that game. And remember, before that point, it's basically like a one-possession game. That's a field position, one-possession game. And he had 30 throws, and Singleton and Allen between them had 18 carries. It's like there was never going to be a situation where Ohio State was going to be locked into a one-possession game late, and Marvin Harrison Jr. had only been targeted 5 times. That was not going to happen. Day is too seasoned in big matchups to go down that way. He acted like Rivera or Hoffman or Randy Johnson, knowing that in the biggest moment, I'm going to go down, or if I'm going to go down, it's going to be with my best pitch, and he threw it. And you knew it, he knew it, and it still succeeded. Some other just quick thoughts off of this game. Ohio State, obviously, they've got to feel great about this. They've got what now is the best resume in the country. A couple of top 10 wins, one on the road over Notre Dame, now against Penn State. Those are 2 really good football teams. Penn State's still a really good football team, folks. There's no doubt about this in my mind. And the thing that I think that they feel so good about, the Buckeyes, is that they won both of those games in a manner in which people were questioning whether they could do it or not, which are 2 slugfests, low scoring, slugfest, defensive oriented, run game oriented, toughness oriented. That was the narrative coming in. Ohio against the world, right? I mean, Ryan Day, he told us earlier in the year, and they won both of those games. It's not going to shock me if they're able to take care of business against Wisconsin next week, and it won't shock me if they're number 1 in the first CFP rankings with the resume that they have. They've got to be feeling great about that. Their defense is for real. I love that defense. They're safe. They do not give up the big play, and they are able to do that because their front 7 flat got after it. You know, there's a reason why Penn State couldn't just hand the ball off to run. Now, were they creative in doing it? No. But they couldn't just run their base run game because the front 7 for Ohio State was outstanding. Those defensive tackles really played well. The linebackers really played well. And when they needed it, the pass rush showed up because Aller had no chance in the passing game. The wide receivers weren't getting any separation. And if they could get separation, it was going to be way later in the passing concept than the 2.5, 3 seconds that the protection was affording in the first place. So yeah, the defense was outstanding for Ohio State. They stifled Penn State. They had 1 first down in the second half before that final drive. They had 6 total yards in the second half before the final drive, and that was basically mop-up duty at the end. Last thing that I would just say is that they won that game, and you could make an argument that 3 of their 5 best players, 6 best players on their team weren't even playing in the game. So they were able to beat a top 10 team without Travion Henderson, without Emeka Egbuka, and without Denzel Burke, on the other hand. They did that defensively without their best cover corner. So we're talking about Penn State not having wide receivers that can get open, and it's not like Ohio State had their best corner on the field. Denzel Burke didn't play in that game. Give a lot of credit to Jermaine Matthews, by the way, true freshman corner. He was out there quite a bit, and he was very good. And then the last thought would just be for Penn State. All is not lost for Penn State. If you're Penn State and you can go home and you can fix this and you can learn from this and they can find and develop that out pitch, they still have Michigan out there. They still have them. And this is a scenario where, like, hey, even if Ohio State wins out, a resume with a win over Michigan and being 11-1 at that point is going to look really good. You don't know what's going to happen. Ohio State still got into the CFP last year at 11-1 and a non-division champ. Didn't play in the conference championship game. So keep plugging away and learn from your mistakes. We all thought that it was time to take the next step. But what needed to be learned is that in order to take the next step, it wasn't about just doing what you do a little bit better. It was finding the small areas within your team where you can find an out pitch, where they can take you to even the next level and then the next level after that, and you lean into those areas. Learn from what Ryan Day and Ohio State did with Marvin Harrison Jr. and lean into those areas of your team that can do the same for you.